Ah, buenos días, quisiera darles la bienvenida a todos ustedes y solamente informarles que estamos resolviendo unos problemas técnicos y empezaremos dentro de poco.
All right, so we'll go on and get started.
Ok, vamos a empezar.
And so thanks everybody for coming. If you can't
Gracias a
hear,
todos
or if
por haber
there's any
venido.
type
Si
of
no pueden
technical
escuchar
issue,
o
put
tienen
it in
algún
the chat.
problema técnico, por favor
My name is
avísenos
Lisa
y
Job
pónganlo en el
Shields.
chat. Mi nombre es Gisa Job Shields.
I work at Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services.
Trabajo en el Departamento de Salud Mental.
And I'm joined today by some of our stakeholder group members who I'll introduce.
Y hoy me están acompañando unos compañeros de trabajo.
So we have Toyin Ola, who's our project coordinator.
Tenemos a Toyin Ola, que es la coordinadora del sector privado.
We have Catherine Hawks, who's going to facilitate the conversation.
Tenemos a Catherine Hawks, quien es la persona que va a facilitar la conversación.
We've got Christy Ivanko.
Tenemos a Christy Evanco.
And Tanya Miller.
Y a Tanya Millen.
And I'm going to just check and make sure no one, oh, and one more, let me move one over. We've also got Dr. Atasha Christian.
Y también tenemos al doctor Atasha Christian.
All right, so we'll be kind of tag teaming between the chat and talking in the group here, and then trying to run in the background. So
vamos a estar todos aquí, vamos a estar en el chat y vamos a estar detrás monitoreando todo este proceso.
All right, so I think that everything is set up. Is everyone, I'm just curious, for those of you in the English channel, can you hear the Spanish too? Okay. Well, I think that if you, you might be able to go under your interpretation and do some kind of muting if you only want to hear one, if that's under the little world icon.
Sí, si ustedes nada más quieren escuchar
There, I think that might be, did that do the trick?
Estén en el canal que dice español.
Well, I think we're okay to proceed if that's okay with everybody.
Si todos están bien y escuchan los dos idiomas, entonces vamos a proceder.
All right. So, thanks again for coming. We really appreciate it. I'm not going to spend too much of your
Gracias por
time
venir,
at the
de verdad.
beginning.
Estamos muy contentos de que puedan estar aquí.
No, I want to do a little bit of an introduction to the project, the work group, and
quisiera dar una introducción al proyecto y al grupo de trabajo.
So we have a group of 40 people on the statewide work group.
Tenemos un grupo de 40 personas a nivel estatal.
We also have 10 ex officio members, and then the 5 initial areas that
Tenemos
are starting the project.
10 miembros que son ex oficios y 10 personas del sector privado están representadas aquí.
So it's going all across behavioral health, developmental disabilities,
todo es
substance use,
de salud
law
mental,
enforcement, social justice, and racial
de
equity.
drogas, equidad racial y justicia racial.
So we have a good group, but a very large and really important project that we will be tackling.
Tenemos un grupo bastante grande, pero
And
también es un proyecto bastante grande.
The Marcus David Peters Act is really about providing a behavioral health response
y la
to a behavioral health emergency.
La política Marcus responde a un
And
problema de salud
I want to
mental
share something I heard
para
today,
una
just very quickly,
para un problema
because
que tenemos
sometimes
ahora.
we think a lot about sort of these medical parallels, right? And this
Muchas veces pensamos
emergency situation,
entre lo que
um,
es una emergencia
which fits a lot
médica,
about a behavioral health emergency, but it also kind of misses something. And
pero
what I
esto
heard
también
was
cabe dentro de lo que llamamos una
he
emergencia
referred
médica.
to a
Sin
crisis as
embargo,
a biographical disruption.
nosotros referimos a una crisis como lo que es
And I really liked that
una,
because,
dis-
it just highlights
una-
that
un
behavioral
rompimiento
health crises and emergencies, they do happen. We know that it's part of life.
a
We
las
know that
cosas que
it can
pasan.
impact anybody.
Nosotros sabemos que
And it
estas
is
cosas le pueden
disruptive. It does
pasar
change your story.
a todo el
And
mundo
it's
en cualquier
stressful,
momento, como cualquier emergencia,
but it is something that you can that can be overcome, and we need to be providing the right supports for those
y,
situations.
y a
So just
pesar de
wanted to
que es
share that.
algo que interrumpe nuestras vidas, ustedes estamos tratando de buscar la manera de apoyar para que puedan seguir adelante con su vida.
So for the project, Department
Para
of
este
Behavioral
proyecto,
Health
el
and
Departamento de
Department of
Salud
Criminal Justice
y el
Services, we
Departamento
have
de
to collaborate
Servicios
on a plan
Criminales están
that needs to
colaborando
be
con un
ready
plan
July 1st
que
of this year.
necesita estar listo para el 1 de julio de este año.
The act takes a systemic approach to the
La
concerns
política
regarding
es sistemática
behavioral health crisis
sobre la
response,
crisis de
law
salud mental, la
enforcement,
respuesta
racial
a la
disparities
crisis
in
de
behavioral
salud
health
mental
and law enforcement.
y también el tema
And we think
de
that
los policías
these are
y la
systemic
justicia.
issues.
Y estamos seguros de que estos
So
son
when you see
abusos
our plan,
sistemáticos.
it will probably reflect that. We're just getting started, but the plan will likely have
El
components
plan va a
related to
reflejar esto, pero
policies,
y también va
procedures,
a tener muchas
um,
personas que lo ponen,
different
pero
agencies, so
eso es
we are
diferente,
taking a
eso es
systemic
normal
approach, even though we have
que
not yet
pase y estamos
started
tratando de
writing the
buscar a
plan.
diferentes contrapartes que nos apoyen a
The plan is also
colaborar con
going to
nosotros.
have different
El
requirements
plan
at the state,
también va a tener
regional, and local
requisitos
level.
diferentes al nivel estatal y
That's
regional.
something that we're really trying our
Y
best
eso
to
es
get right.
algo que es lo que
We
nosotros de
think
verdad
that
queremos hacer
there will
bien.
be some universal
Y
protections
va a
and
haber una
frameworks that
protección
will work across the
universal
state, but
alrededor
we
de
also
todo el
know that
estado,
each community is different,
pero también sabemos
and
que
your
cada
existing
comunidad es
911 systems are
diferente
different.
y
And so we're
que
really
los
trying to work
sistemas de
hard to get the right
911,
support at the right
911 que
level.
existen ahora son
Um,
diferentes, pero
it's
estamos
it
tratando
is
de
too
buscar el
important of an
apoyo
issue
al
for us
nivel
to get
local.
wrong.
Es un
And so
tema muy
we
importante para
feel
que nosotros
really good about the
no lo
stakeholder group
tengamos
that we have.
no lo tengamos
And
correctamente.
the members that are here
Estamos
tonight,
súper bien sobre el
very
grupo que hemos
quickly,
formado
in our first meeting, really,
y los miembros que tenemos aquí esta noche.
really
En
shared
nuestra
that
primera
we
reunión
need more community input.
compartieron que
We have
necesitamos
some
más
ideas.
ideas
There was some
y
community input
colaboración
earlier,
por
but
parte de la
the
comunidad.
stakeholders that are on here tonight very quickly
Pero
formed a
las
subgroup focused
contrapartes que
around
están
getting more
aquí
community input.
hicieron
And
unos
they
mini
formed
grupos
very
para
quickly, and
tratar
so now
de
that these listening sessions are a result of that.
conseguir apoyo
And there will
de
also be
la
a survey coming
comunidad.
out as a
Y por
result of
eso
that.
tenemos esta
Really with
reunión
this
en
idea
la que
of
estamos
we need to hear
proporcionando
directly from people
información,
that have
porque queremos
experienced
escuchar
this, and we need to
directamente
get that
sobre
input
las
on the front
personas que
end
tienen
before we
experiencia con
start
esto
writing.
y queremos
I'm
estar
really thankful for the work group for putting
en la
all this
parte de
together.
adelante de esta iniciativa.
So, so we're going to start
Así que
taking
vamos
comments,
a
depending on, looks like we have a good turnout, so we'll
empezar a recibir los
do
comentarios.
comments in
Tenemos
order. If we
una
have
buena
time, there might be time
participación
for
hoy.
discussion after that.
Después de los comentarios
And we just want to know from you
va a
whatever
haber
you think, what you think is most important for us to include in the
va a
plan.
haber tiempo para hablar, pero queremos
And
escuchar de ustedes
whether
qué
that's
es lo
by
que
sharing
ustedes
your
consideran
story
más importante
or
para que
sharing
esté
ideas that you have
en
about the type of response, any of that. That's what we're here to gather
en este
tonight.
plan y estamos
This
aquí
is
para
being
recoger
recorded,
esa información.
and
Estamos
so we'll
grabando
be able to essentially review it from there.
esta estamos grabando
in
esta
addition to
sesión y
this
si
that we're
quieren revisarlas,
communicating.
pues vamos a poder hacerlo.
So I'm going to pause there. Looks like we might have a
Voy a
couple of
hacer una pausa
technical
aquí.
pieces in the chat. So I'll just scroll through those.
Tenemos varias preguntas en el chat.
Looks like y'all are figuring it
I
out.
think we've caught them. We did just see that if you change your view to gallery, then that may help from things
Si
switching too
ustedes
much.
cambian la vista del zoom a galería, va a prevenir que se cambie mucho.
Oh, it's not letting you do it. Okay, here, let me, what about that?
¿Eso te ayudó?
Did that make everyone be in gallery now? Good, okay, sorry about that. All right, well, I'm gonna pass it to Catherine Hawks to
le voy a
go ahead
pasar
and
la
begin
palabra ahora a Catherine Hawks
accepting our
para que
comments.
ella empiece.
Christy, do you want to, since you're kind of managing the list, do you want to give the first name?
Christy, ¿quieres por favor darle el primer nombre?
Yes, right now I have 6 people in line. The first name is Teresa Champion.
El primer nombre es Teresa Champion.
Christy, you were on mute, I think, when you read the name.
I was?
No, I heard it. Sorry, that was my bad. I'm just we have a good turnout, so I'm just I'm finding them and then I'm going to move them over to be a panelist. And then at that point, everyone will be able to hear them. So
Ahora
go ahead,
estamos
Catherine.
mudando ahorita a Teresa a
Hi,
este
Teresa.
panel.
Would you like to share your comments?
Teresa, ¿quieres compartir tus comentarios?
My name is Teresa Champion,
Mi
and I'm
nombre es Teresa
on
Champion
this project.
y trabajo.
A new, I'm sorry, I'm trying to go back and remute the interpretation, which we're very grateful for. This is a new project.
Esto es un proyecto nuevo.
Before,
No estoy
and I
familiar
want
con
to
este
thank Tanya
proyecto, pero
Milling and the
quisiera
ARC for sending it out again, so that we could distribute it generally to the public. We have been discussing in other groups I've been participating in with the Autism Society, what do you do when you have to call for help? Who do you call? What to expect when that happens? And I don't know if I'm being appropriate in my comments tonight. If this isn't the direction you want me to go, Christy will tell me. We're good friends. But the very first time we had to call for help for my son, I was calling for an ambulance for transport to the hospital. I did not expect law enforcement to accompany them. And I think that is something that we have to address with reference to mental health crisis. And I think there was no, this was like 2012 or 13. There was no team, with a behavioral intervention there, crisis intervention team. I don't think Fairfax had any sort of deferred prosecution. At the time, I did not realize that if my son scratched law enforcement, that was an assault on law enforcement. And if he was convicted of that, that would be a mandatory minimum of 6 months and a felony. So I was blissfully unaware of really the crisis we were in. He was tasered 4 times. He was naked on his front porch, weighed maybe 120 pounds, autistic, in a severe mental health crisis. And we were traumatized too. So I don't think many people understand that when someone is tasered, they shoot fish hooks into your skin that are attached to the filaments that are connected to the gun that give you the charge. And those fish hooks have to be removed in the ER. So it's traumatizing for everyone. We have since figured out a way to, if we have to call for transport, to have control over my son, so that and I understand. I mean, police don't want to come into a situation that they don't understand what they're walking into, but we've learned to meet them on the sidewalk or at the foot of the driveway. And I have a card that I write my son's name, his date of birth, his medications, his diagnosis on, and explain the situation, that we just need help getting him to the hospital. And we wrap him in a towel and papoose him. And then police come in, and my husband and I luckily are still able to get down on the floor. I'm getting to the point in age where I can't really kneel down that well, and hold my son still. Police come in and they take over and hold him, and then EMS comes, and then they give him the shot for transportation. All of that we figured out on our own, that after calling for help, that help was not coming in any way, shape, or form that was useful for someone in a mental health crisis. And if law enforcement is involved and someone is in a fight or flight panic attack, if law enforcement gets scratched, and my son has a tic disorder where he spits, if law enforcement is spit on, that's an assault. And now my son is 27. So thankfully, we had recent legislation that was passed that allows introduction of mental health issues and intellectual disability and developmental disability into a criminal justice setting. Before that, you could not, you had no way. The only hope you had was that the law enforcement officer did not press charges. Luckily, that happened. The law enforcement officer did not press charges, but we didn't know, we were just thankful. So, because my son scratched him, I guess I left that out. He had a scratch on his hand. So we also have to work toward, there was a bill that did not pass this year with reference to assault on a law enforcement officer and decriminalizing that. We'll have to live with this legislation that we did pass for a while and see if it addresses some of these issues for mental health. If not, then we as a community need to push very hard for defelonization of assault on a law enforcement officer. And I mean, that legislation, or that law is used against minority communities and people with disabilities to harshly charge them, to get them to plead to a lesser offense. Our population does not need a felony charge on their record that puts at risk their social services. If you apply for SNAP benefits, they ask you if you have a felony on your record. So all of this goes to say that we have to take law enforcement out of a response for someone in a mental health crisis, unless we can be assured that there will not be felony charges filed. We can't risk that. So I'm advocating that, well, obviously everyone believes that there needs to be more training, but there needs to be co-responding with to a mental health crisis by mental health professionals. And if law enforcement has to be there for whatever reason, they take a back seat and let mental health take charge of a situation like that. So I don't know if those are appropriate comments. I appreciate the opportunity to share, and I look forward to providing written comments. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Teresa. And thank you very much for sharing your very personal experience and the experiences of your son, and for highlighting how police intervention can be traumatic for the person, for the person who is in that situation, as well as the family. And we really appreciate your comments. And through the Marcus Alert, and the public comments and the community comments, we do hope to find which response teams are most appropriate and when they should respond. So thank you very much, Teresa.
Thank you.
I think German is next. Hi, German. So sorry, German, you're muted.
We can't hear you, German, unless others can.
Christina says she can.
Is the comment in Spanish?
Hello.
We can hear you now. Hi, German.
Hi. My name is pronounced Herman.
So sorry. Hi, Herman. My apologies.
It's all right. I'm from Trillium Center Inc. And I was just wondering. I think it would be a good idea to have like in the mobile response unit for Prince William County. I think it would be a good idea to have a chaplain on call, because I know that if I had a chaplain, speaking to me while I was going through the process of going to the hospital, then I think things would have gone a bit smoother, or maybe it would have been less painful for me. And yeah, I was just wondering, do you think like maybe on call, they don't necessarily have to be traveling with the mobile response unit, but yeah.
Thank you so much, German. That's a wonderful consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Jude is next. German, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
No, that's about it. That's about it.
Thank you very much. That was a very, very wonderful suggestion, and thank you so much for your comments, Herman. I think Jude is next. So sorry, Jude, we can't hear you. But Christina can.
Jude, you might be in the Spanish channel, or we can't hear you in the English channel. Sorry.
All right. Can you hear me now? In the English?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. So I was hearing the Spanish, and okay. So hopefully everyone can hear me now. So I have a similar situation. I'm sorry, is it echoing the Spanish on my channel? Okay, because I can.
No, we can hear you perfectly.
And you can mute, if you go to your language settings, there should be a way for you to do some kind of mute or mute audio if you only want to hear the one language at a time.
Okay, I had that figured out a few minutes ago, but I'll just keep talking as long as you can hear. I've known Teresa Champion now for. I did not realize that she and I had where my son was having a meltdown, and I called 911 for an ambulance because he was talking about suicide. And when I was discussing it with her, I said, I made the comment, she said, why do you think that he needs to go to the hospital? And I said, he's just not acting like himself at all. I've seen him this upset and his dad offered to give him a hug. And he said, if you come near me, I'm afraid that I might swing at you or something. And they took that as violence, and the police came, and it just went completely in an ugly direction rather than the way that it should have been handled. So, we spent the entire evening over at the hospital. They did finally say, we can, instead of taking your son to jail, we can take him to Tucker's pavilion, Tucker's hospital. And so they said, but, we will have to handcuff him because of the statement that he had made, which was completely nothing except him making it clear to his dad, I'm sorry, when I talk on top of her, I cannot hear her. Okay. I can see you. I don't.
Stop, and then I translate so everybody can hear you. Thank you.
So, where was I? Let's see. So he, so the officer had said, we either have to take him to jail or we can take him over to Tucker's. And so they said that they would take him to Tucker's instead of to jail. My husband and I were completely baffled. We were just so naive of this whole circumstance. Like, why in the world are police here when I called for an ambulance to take my son to the hospital because he is suicidal? I'm going to give her a chance to catch up. Thank you. So by the time, so they did handcuff him, and which was upsetting, and took him out to the police car, put him in, and my husband and I followed, and they took him over to Tucker's, and then they said, well, we have done our job. So by this time he's traumatized, so he started out having the feelings of suicide. And then all of a sudden he's dealing with 3 police officers and being handcuffed and put in the back of a police car for crying and saying that he was suicidal, absolutely confused about what is going on. So we spent hours at Tucker's, and we missed that opportunity that we would have had for him to open up and feel the safety and the freedom to talk about what was going on with him and why he was feeling this way. And instead, he just shut completely down and said, I want to go home. I don't want to talk to anyone. I just want to go home with my parents. I'm going to let her catch up. Thank you. So needless to say, anytime after that, when there was any kind of incident where we felt that our son was having a meltdown or whatever, we handled it ourselves within the family. We would call a therapist, you know, if there was mention of, you know, take him over to Tucker's or whatever. And so this was years ago. So I'm going to say this was back in 2010, roughly. So long before we even really had a full, I think, a full understanding of autism and how to respond. But so I guess my input here would be that I so greatly appreciate everything that you all are doing. This is very much needed. What a difference it would have made both for Teresa's circumstance and ours if instead of 3 police officers, if someone who was not only maybe a counselor, but someone who also understood about autism. So if there's a way to specify, because somebody would have to understand the developmental age of the person, in addition to just that there is a crisis, like a mental health or developmental disability crisis. I'm going to give her a chance now to catch up with that. Thank you. And so I do want to also say, I don't know if I introduced myself I am the Director of Communications for LRID, Legal Reform for the Intellectually and Developmentally Disabled. And we were very much a part of the bill that will be now law that Teresa mentioned. And I just want to give kudos to Brian Kilmar, our chairman, and Tanya Milling. She worked very, very hard on that. And I know that Teresa did also. And so thank you to everyone who's doing all this great work. It's very needed for this population.
Thank you very much, June. We very much appreciate your comments, and we very much empathize with your personal story that you share. I like to echo something that one of our community members shared in the chat box, which is that she said, my heart breaks listening to other parents and their stories, and we empathize and we feel the same as well. So thank you very much. It takes a lot to have to relive that experience and share that. And thus far, it seems between Teresa, Herman, and yourself, Jude, that the common theme is, what is the appropriate response? Who is the appropriate person to respond to a call, and how traumatic police intervention can be, and whether the appropriate person is someone who specializes and understands what that call is and how to really be able to respond appropriately, or whether it's a peer support member or a chaplain, as Herman shares. So thank you very much, June. We really appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have Steve next.
Sorry, is it Stephen Grammer?
Yes, I think so.
Perfect. Sorry, just wanted to make sure I got the right person. There we go.
Hi, Steve. So sorry, we can't hear you. But Christina can.
Yeah, there must be, I don't know what it looks like on your end, but there must be something to come over to the English channel down under interpretation, down under the interpretation.
Try this. How about now?
Yes, can hear you perfectly.
Okay. My name is, thank you. My name is William, and I'll be translating for Stephen, and he'll be filling in some information here. I'll start off by saying that Steve has cerebral palsy. So a lot of the examples that he's going to share really evolve around officers or even 911 dispatchers being able to understand him. And I think the stories that you're going to hear from Stephen revolve around really the people, whether it's the person on the other end of the line, the dispatcher taking the call, or whether it's the officer responding, really just trying to take the time to listen. Because myself, when I first met Stephen, he is hard to understand, but if you really take time to listen, let him finish, and really focus on what he's saying, he is very understandable. I think that's where a lot of his frustration has been, is with the officers or the dispatcher really not taking the time to try to listen to what he's saying. I would also like to mention that Stephen is an advocate for people with disabilities. He does a lot of advocate work through the state legislators. So he's very much involved in advocating for folks with disabilities. Yeah, he's talking about an incident where one time an officer responded to a break-in to his house, and because Stephen was hard to understand, I don't know if the officer thought that he was on something or whatever, but they were shining a bright light in his eyes when he was trying to explain what had happened. Yes, one time he hit the life alert button and told them that he needed a cop, and they sent an ambulance. He recently reached out to the EMS headquarters because he had a couple of these incidents happen, and he offered his services to go in and help train responders on how to deal with folks like him that may be difficult to understand. And they told him that he would not be able to come in to help train because of COVID. Yeah, and they told him that they do train officers on dealing with folks of this nature. Weeks. They said. Oh, reach. That reach. Okay. Well, I have not seen But he has not seen where they get trained. Even what? Oh, even paramedics. And a lot of it is they just don't take the time to listen to trying to understand him. Can I share the incident? We did have an incident about, I don't know, maybe a month and a half ago where there was an attempted break-in. We called 911. And if I had not been here to answer the door, the officer said that because Steve can't get out of bed to go answer the door. And the officer had said when we were discussing with him that if no one had come to the door, he probably would have left, which kind of stunned us both, that you're responding to a call with an attempted break-in, that somehow you want to try to gain access to that house to find out what's happening. But one of the things the officer did mention was that he could flag this house indicating that there was a person with CP that lived here, so that if that ever happened again, that it would be flagged in the system and the officers or the responding units would know. So there was a time the police told him that he needed to get up, and he's in the bed and can't get up by himself, and there was no way that he could do that. So I think a lot of it goes to the training of the officers or responding personnel. Anything else you want to add? And he asked what can be done about this. He's offered his own services. And Reach says they train, but it doesn't look like it. Okay.
Thank you so much, William, and thank you very much, Stephen. We really appreciate your comments and your personal experiences that you've shared. And thank you very much for bringing attention to the need for training and how training should look, and how specific that training should be and how much of a difference it can make. So thank you very much.
So he's offering his services. If you need help with, if anyone needs help with training or advocacy, he'd be willing to help. You can contact him.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
I'm going to put my email. I'm going to put my email in the panelist chat. If you wouldn't mind connecting that way, because I can't see your email, Stephen.
Okay, we'll put ours there as well. Thank you.
I think Jeff is next. Hi, Jeff. So sorry we can't hear you. But Christina can. Still can't hear you. there should be a setting to switch from the Spanish room. So sorry, still can't hear you.
Christina, can you hear Jeff? Does he see the interpretation button at the bottom? Oh, so we've got a comment that you need to click mute original language.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Now we can hear you.
I wish I had known that to share that with all of you. Thank you.
Hi, Jeff. We could hear you for a moment, but we can't hear you anymore.
I'm going to move Michael over also, and then that way, as they work on the technical difficulties, Jeff, just you can speak up again if you think it starts working. We did hear you for a second there.
Hi, Michael.
Hello, were you calling me?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, I did change the settings again after you brought me into the panel. So my name is Michael, Michael Lane, and I wanted to speak on a couple matters. One about the role of peer support in some of these initiatives, and also more general about some of the observations that I have. As far as who I am a senior manager for a major behavioral health system in Virginia. I am also someone who was called 911 for myself and for somebody else who I've lived with. Regarding mental health issues, and I have been an advocate for others who have experienced similar things. Also have managed and developed peer support programs here, and I've done that across the country. So I am, and I should say in other places, not across the country, not everywhere. That's so I would. I just want to observe regarding the role of peer support. I think it can be really helpful, but let me talk about that. What I mean is that I know it's kind of an optional thing in the Marcus bill, and I think many of you probably know that peer supporters can connect to people in a different way. And sometimes we see that peer supporters can connect and somebody will be willing to tell them something that they wouldn't tell somebody else, or say, hey, you've kind of been there in some way. And it might create a connection and perhaps de-escalate because they're not in that professional capacity, either as a law enforcement officer or as even a clinician. However, in order to have peer support be effective, there needs to be effective training. You can't just toss somebody in there who has even just gone through who is even just certified as a peer specialist, who has gone through the basic training, has collected some number of hours. That the amount of training that is mandated to become a registered peer recovery specialist is, in my opinion, not sufficient to equip peer specialists. As much as I love peer specialists, and I used to work as one some years ago, not sufficient to equip peer specialists to be able to do things like mobile crisis and really be a full member of the team. That is not to say that there aren't peer specialists who do that and do it effectively. It's just that you got to find the exact right person, and you just got to find that right magic mix instead of having a way to prepare people in a more mindful way, so you have more people can be that can have that magic set of skills that are needed. The So I really hope that it's looked at. Okay, what do you need to make peer specialist effective? It can be challenging though to think, okay, well, that's just going to cost resources, time, or whatnot. Yes, it will, um, and there's not an infinite amount of funding for this initiative or for any others. I do think that there are other things occurring in the recovery and peer support world with DBHS and others that this could dovetail with to piggyback with other initiatives. If I could just change gears a little bit then to talk about it was brought out earlier about expectations. When you are calling, when you are having a mental health crisis, if you don't know even what it is, maybe you don't even know that it's mental health you're dealing with. You don't know what's going on. There's It's really difficult when you have no idea what to expect. And there's some ways you can't get around that. There's some ways that you're never going to be able to understand every single permutation. However, even for people who are familiar with the system, who have been calling for their loved ones, for others, they call and you might get a CIT officer, and you might not. You may get a mobile crisis coming out for this one. You may not. You may get you may get reach for this one. You might not. You may get people coming down and lock down the block, and you might not. Myself, I experienced out years ago. This was not in Virginia. Calling 911 after being on the phone with a suicide hotline, and things were really degenerating. And I had a roommate, and both of us were really going downhill quickly. And he was out in the street, not fully clothed, yelling and screaming. I was really doing not well in a different way, with having thoughts of suicide, and calling 911, and the entire block. It was a large block. I don't even know how many squad cars were there. I was in no state to be doing any counting, and it was really alarming. Now they were able to get. Fortunately, things didn't escalate further from there. Fortunately, I found out later that my roommate was on a different list. He was on a list flagged in a different way, and that flag was actually not. I said different list. He was on a list. That flag was actually not helpful for him, because it provoked a response that was way out of proportion. That for what it the next week I found myself in a district attorney's office talking about what had just gone down, and that was the last thing. I'd never talked to law enforcement for that. But let me talk about what happened next. Also, as they were working with the situation, they came into the apartment, and things were not in a good state in that apartment. It was pretty bad, really, and they were making some comments to that effect. And while they could have been certainly worse, but they were noting how pretty awful things were. And felt maybe slightly offended, but more than after that they left. And so there was this observation of uh, people who were really struggling, and of course there's no follow-up from that. And that's one thing I think having clinicians be more involved is not just for that situation. Yes, that could be really important for kind of decompressing from having it go a different direction than it might otherwise, but also there being able to observe what is happening in that situation. What is going on there? What are the sights, the sounds, the context, the little those subtleties and nuances of what people are like when they're in distress, in a different way when you're trained in behavioral health. That's different than when you're trained as a law enforcement officer. If somebody could have come back around later on and got a referral or anything that would have been say, hey, yes, this is a problem. Yes, and hey, wow, this must be really hard to live this way, and to come back around and perhaps someone reach out for help so that next call didn't come in the first place. So we sometimes in my communities we talk about crisis being an opportunity, and that's you can make it an opportunity for yourself to learn from it, but it's also an opportunity to really perhaps be able to catch something you wouldn't otherwise make it see. I am concerned, however, um, I am concerned about the amount of funding that is attached to this initiative. I'm concerned because it might exacerbate the expectations uh, to gap. Because if you have a community response team, or I mean CIT, pardon me, if you have a mobile crisis, that's what I was going for, available a certain amount of hours a day, then you say, okay, well, if it happens to be Monday through Friday, 10 to 6, then you call and you're going to get this response. Of course, if it's Friday, if it's a Saturday night, you get that response. If it's Monday morning, you get that response. And if you are over in this part of the county, you get that response. That part of the region, you get this response. It's going to, it runs a risk of exacerbating inequities. Also of figuring out, okay, how do we communicate to people what is what you can expect when you pick up that phone? What you can expect when you reach out for help? And frankly, a lot of people are going to say, hey, okay, here's the hours of mobile crisis. So we're sitting here at Sunday, 6 p.m. We're going to try to white knuckle this crisis till tomorrow, so that hopefully we can get a better response. And that may or may not be the thing to do in that moment. But we all know that people were going to try to get their needs met. And we've heard stories already about, based on the lessons learned, you're going to try to do what you can. And sometimes people have called that kind of to game the system, but really it's trying to get your needs met. So I will just conclude by saying I'm really hoping that we can move towards, even though it may take a while, it being less like a box of chocolates that you never know what you're going to get, like Forrest Gump. That you can have something there. When you pick up that chocolate, that one's got the nuts in it, and not everything is just kind of a roulette. I will say that there are some very fantastic law enforcement officers that you can get very lucky to get them to show up, and there's others who are not fully on board. And I will conclude then again, expectations with peer support, the importance of training, and I appreciate the opportunity to come. And I will also want to just make another disclaimer that I'm just speaking for myself and not for any of the organizations that I may be associated with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. We really appreciate your comments, and thank you for highlighting peer support, as well as how a mental health crisis, a mental health event can really be the segue to referrals. So someone may be having a crisis, but if the right intervention is there, they may be able to get a referral and get the help that they need. And thank you so much for highlighting that. I think that is really important, very critical. Thank you so much, Michael. I think we have Gordon next. Oh, yes, Christina, are we taking a break? Yes, Christina.
¿Hay alguien que esté escuchando esto en español en este momento que quisiera hacer un comentario? ¿Hay alguien que esté escuchando esto que hable español que quisiera hacer un comentario?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to take a 5-minute break and come back.
Okay.
Thank you.
so our interpreter, Christina, is taking a 5-minute break. And then after that, we have Jeff.
So she informed everyone on the Spanish channel and asked them about comments. So I think it's okay for us to proceed with one comment in the interim. She kind of set them up for that if we want to take Jeff's comment.
Okay, excellent.
If that is possible, can you all hear me this time?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right, sorry about that.
That's okay.
So I'll just give my brief background is that I've been just coming off of working full-time for the past 3 years as a pre-admission screening clinician, and I still do it part-time. And the CSB with which I've been working, we do have a crisis response team. Just like Michael was saying in the last call, though, its hours are limited. We've actually increased them, but they're still only on weekdays and only pretty much during daylight hours for the time being. But obviously, for all of our pre-screeners, as well as our clinicians we've got 2 crisis response teams right now. They're also pre-screeners, and I don't know what the models are across the state, but one of the things listening to the other comments is that, and what we know, and in the work that we do, is that you're dealing with every kind of mental health crisis, behavioral health crisis, dealing with the full spectrum of both mental illness, people with developmental and intellectual disabilities, as well as people that are aging and coping with the development of dementia. So the one of the concerns that I have is just that for the mental health clinicians in particular, that there is the requirements for that position are suitable enough that there's enough educational background as well as training so that the individuals there, are really going to be called upon to do more than what a lot of the pre-screeners are doing now. Whereas, most of us are either designated to an office or a hospital when we're working. To be out in the field, it calls on such a wide skill set. I think that, again, as Michael was saying, that the peer support members are going to be very essential for the experience that they bring. But, for people that may not be aware, like currently, although I think there have been some changes given the crisis, but that the training requirements for pre-screeners is 40 hours of shadowing. And that's not just 40 hours of shadowing in the general job. That's 40 hours of shadowing cases being worked through, followed by 40 hours of being shadowed, which is also can be a real time requirement. It's a difficult process for us to onboard, especially part-time staff, and get them to the point where they're certified to be pre-screened. And that's not to say that I think that that's not what should be happening, but more just state the point that even with that, we still, are continuing to learn, how to do the job. And 3 years is longer than some, but not nearly as long as a lot. But in 3 years, I was continuing to learn new aspects about the community, about our law enforcement agencies, about the resources that were available, as well as, honing my ability to evaluate for, and diagnose and make treatment recommendations. So overall, the main point of what I'm trying to say is that that there be, whatever the requirements end up being for the mental health clinician in particular, that they are robust enough, and that's not something that is, overlooked or looked past too quickly.
Thank you so much, Jeff. We really appreciate your comments, and thank you for emphasizing the importance of training and making sure that everyone has proper training and everyone is qualified to respond to these calls appropriately. Thank you, Jeff. I think we have
Creo que tenemos
Gordon next.
a Gordon. La próxima persona es Gordon.
Gordon Dean.
Gordon Dean.
So sorry, Gordon, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I disappeared in the ozone for a minute.
Christina can.
I'm following
Can
Michael
you
Lane.
switch into the English channel?
Gordon, they can't hear you.
They can hear me? Is this English?
Perfect. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we're both. So yeah, I'm following. I want to say I'm following Michael Lane. And okay. And Michael, by the way, helps a lot of people. He spoke for himself, but he helps a lot of other people. Okay. So is this still, so I wanted to say first that I'm a facilitator of a NAMI family support group in Northern Virginia. And I wanted to give a summary of an incident that sort of addresses a lot of these issues. It's a traumatic incident, so I'm going to leave a lot of it out, and it didn't end up well. But and like I said, I will say that the first thing that maybe could come out of this is embedding behavioral health specialists at 911 centers. Peer support specialists would be really good too, but behavioral health specialists could make a huge difference. The incident I'm going to describe in brief, it was self-harm and involved a knife. The family member called 911, explained what had happened, and said there was a pretty severe injury and this was still going on. The dispatcher is calling, I guess, the police, and I assume the ambulance too. So this is like a three-way conversation. The family member is calling, telling dispatcher, the dispatcher is transferring this primarily to the police officer. The questions the dispatcher asked the family member were sort of heavily focused on the weapon, on the instrument of the injury. And that was being transferred to the police officer. So that directed the cop's mindset, which is, I think that's pretty important, that the way the communication goes from the dispatcher to the police officer in these situations where it's a mental health issue is different than it is when you're calling for a SWAT team. It's a different mindset and a different way to describe the incident. When the police officer, the next part is the entry. First was dispatch, second is entry, and third is the follow-up part, is the aftermath. The police officer enters the house first before EMTs go in. I think this is pretty much true across Virginia. The police officer entered the house when his mind, this person has the parent had already called and said she'd gotten him to get rid of the weapon. It was out of his hand. Fine when he entered the house. So he comes first. The EMTs are outside waiting for him to finish. He goes in, he proceeds to handcuff the individual who's pretty severely injured and bleeding all over. The individual asks the cop, "Why are you handcuffing me?" He says, "I'm trying to save your life." So this is not a criticism of the cops, that they were trained to do it this way. And then it's sort of, the guy ends up on the floor with his legs tied too, before the EMTs ever get in. It did not end up well. At the aftermath, when they got to the ER, mom wanted to go in and see him. The police officer said, "You cannot go in, this is a crime scene." So that's the third piece of this, which partly, I guess, is the Virginia suicide law, which still keeps suicide as a felony, which failed to pass again this year, but it is still a felony in Virginia, so whatever. The police response is the same when somebody has an overdose. They will not let family members in. They will also say it's a crime scene. But I don't know if that connects to that, but I would say that the initial 911 call, the initial entry into the house or the situation, and the aftermath sort of describe a lot of the issues that we're facing. I do think, like I said in the beginning, I think having a behavioral health specialist to intervene or to mitigate the normal way things are communicated to police officers could make a big difference. Okay, that's the end. Thanks. That's the end of that.
Thank you so much, Gordon. We really appreciate you sharing your personal story. And again, we know that for many of you sharing your personal experiences, a lot of these experiences are traumatic and it's difficult to share these. So we really do thank you for taking the time to share those and give us further insight into what actually occurs and what some of your lived experiences are. And thank you for also bringing attention to restraints. In our previous session, there was some discussion about restraints and whether restraints are necessary, how traumatizing this can be, and also a discussion around soft restraints as well. So thank you very much, Gordon. I think Monica is next.
I'm going to read Monica's comment. She asked that I read it. So it says, I hope that this is just a repeat of what has already been discussed or said, that social workers should be hired to work along with dispatch and the sheriff's department to work alongside emergency services. Social workers are mental health experts that are trained to conduct crisis assessments and have advanced education and training in mental health, developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and behavioral disorders. This model has been in place for years in other states, towns, and regions with proven positive effects in reducing excessive force and harmful outcomes.
Thank you so much, Monica. We really appreciate your comments. I believe Beth is next.
Hi.
Hi, Beth.
Hello. I was trying to see if I could be on, but it's not working. I am speaking as a sister of someone with mental illness where police were involved, a parent of a son where we had to call police on occasion, and a grandparent for my daughter. Mental illness has been the primary issue, but also members of my family also are autistic. I've also been involved. I've been retired for several years, but I've been active in volunteer work and came into contact with what's going on in a very specific case. And what happened is the police, I followed up, I'm also a NAMI board member. A young man had an accident and he was charged first with attempted second-degree murder with the assumption that he was trying to kill himself. And so he was intentionally causing this accident. There are a whole lot of other things associated with that. I won't go into it. But what I will say is that this was Virginia Beach, who prides himself, according to the website, on their training, both their CIT training and their training about autism. When I followed up with this to try to understand why it's Matthew Russian, he was not given the option. He was asked if he wanted to be seen by mental health, but he said no. He said no because he wasn't thinking clearly. He didn't have the mental capacity to consent to that question. He had so many signs that were spelled out in the Virginia Beach police guide, that are indications of mental illness, but they said because he didn't consent, they didn't pull in mental health. So he was convicted on something, the idea that he intentionally caused this accident, though no mental health person ever confirmed that he indeed was suicidal or it was intentional. But the biggest part of this that's so distressing to me is that I believe he was 19 at the time, autistic, experienced PTSD from a prior brain injury, and he was experiencing extreme stress, and his dad was not allowed to be there with him. No one was allowed to be there with him. He was questioned, no consent. And when I asked one of the police department individuals about why it wasn't mental health pulled in because all of the guidelines in their manual indicates that if you have the symptoms he had, a mental health team should have been pulled in. And I was given, one of the reasons is that he was charged with a crime. And if you're charged with a crime, you don't have access to the mental health part. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but there certainly needs some education if that is how these things are being handled. The other thing, when I think about the Marcus alert, this was not a situation where he called or his family called and said, we need help. The police showed up on the scene, and the police have to understand when it's appropriate to call in the team. So I urge you all, who I thank so much for doing this work, to be sure that all the team, all the members of law enforcement know when to call in the mental health team. And I do think that these policies must be reviewed carefully to make sure that there are no exceptions. He was treated as though he was guilty from the start, based on an assumption that was made by the people on the scene with no input from mental health professionals. The training, when we talk about the training, the other thing I think must happen is that autistic adults must be a part of providing this training, because the training that's done there, we are learning so much more from the people who understand how their brains work differently from people's neurotypical brains. And the training can't be done by somebody who's training based on what they learned 5 years ago or whatever. We've got to have autistic adults as part of this. The other piece is about consent. We must get across to everybody that consent has to be, you cannot you have to understand whether the individual is capable of giving consent just because they're 19 or 25 or whatever. If they have developmental disability, if they are, depending on autism is so varied, there's so many different manifestations. And if you are also mentally ill, all of these things can impact your ability to give consent. To prevent someone who is under this enormous stress from having a trusted adult with them, whether it's a family member or an advocate, is to prevent justice and to prevent the ability to de-escalate the situation and to meet the needs of the individual. Peer support, I wanted to say that loud and clear, and that was something that was so important. I'll go back to my own experiences, that the peer support. The other thing they can do if we're talking about kids, is if you have a peer, my youngest son, unfortunately took his life when he was 15. If you have a parent who's been through, whether it's calling the police, which was the only option, it still was the only option with my granddaughter. You could call the CSB if you were connected to the CSB, not if you weren't, not if you had a private therapist, but you always got the police with them. A peer can understand all the things that have already been said, but the peer, the family support partner, which is what it's called for parents, can provide resources that others may not be aware of. And then the other thing I wanted to say is about training, and there's been a lot of discussion about this during the General Assembly, and as I've worked with people who are working on bills, is we can't require that. The bill won't pass if you require 2 hours or more than 2 hours of training. And we're talking about people's lives. We're talking about a greatly increased investment of time for doing the wrong thing because people aren't educated. We've got to stop making the excuse that we don't have time to do appropriate training. All right, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Beth. We really appreciate your comments, and your personal experiences that you've shared with us. Thank you so much for sharing those and opening up to us. We do appreciate that. And also, thank you for mentioning the importance of how this impacts different age groups. So, children are equally important. Children are equally a part of the equation. And that's a really important aspect as well. And of course, training has been a common theme during this conversation as well. And thank you for bringing attention to that. Thank you very much, Beth. I think Adrian's comments are going to be read next by Christy.
This is just a quick one. Adrian says, my son is 3, and one of my biggest fears or concerns when he gets older is how authority or law enforcement can misinterpret his stimming or mental distress as a threat.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you very much. So yes, sharing your personal experiences very much touches on what Beth mentioned as well, that this impacts children, and that can't be forgotten. Thank you so much. After Adrian, Christy, who do we have next?
Natasha.
Natasha. Hi, Natasha.
Hello. So thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I appreciate it. I wasn't going to, but I wanted to share, I guess, a slightly different perspective to most of what I've been hearing this evening, in a good way. But I was actually the dependent, the child of an adult, of my only parent who had mental health crises in my preteens throughout my teenage years. And she was actually diagnosed at the time with having bipolar and manic depressant. And my father was deceased. So she was literally my only guardian, mine and my brother's. And the cops were called often when she had what we call lovingly now as episodes. And in those episodes, there were times where my brother and I had to kind of sneak to the phone and find a way to even call for help. Cell phones weren't really around yet-ish. They were just up and coming. So we didn't have one yet. And I'll spare you some of the details, but there would be times where in her episode, she would leave the phone off the hook. So even if we were in a different part of the house, we couldn't call for help. So those times that we could call for help, we were so surprised when I was about 12. It started when I was about 12, and the police officers would show up, and their best course of action at that time was to ask my brother and I to find another place to sleep for the night, which at 12 on a school night is not ideal for most kids when it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, and the police are asking you to leave. And I am minority, I am Black and Puerto Rican. So fortunately, we didn't have any escalated scenes with the police officers. So that was a non-issue, but I guess I don't hear a lot about children or youth or minors when it comes to some of these crises. It's a lot of adults and adults working with and supporting adults. But I cannot imagine how helpful and some of the trauma that would have been spared if a crisis team and people who were trained could have come out to the scene and I wasn't essentially being forcibly removed from my house as a minor. That is definitely, that leaves a lasting effect on you. And I don't think it was until the last police officer who was called out and basically looked at her and gave her a little bit of a reality check and reminded her, this is their home, they're minors, like, where do you expect them to go? It is your responsibility to take care of them. I do think that there could have probably been a little bit more tact in dealing with her crises and keeping us in our home. But after that, I don't think we were forced to leave our home either. So I don't know all the solutions or maybe any of them, but I just wanted to add a slightly different perspective to looking at this and who else is impacted sometimes when it comes to a crisis. So that's pretty much, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. We really appreciate your comments and your personal, your lived experiences. And thank you for giving us a different perspective. It is very important to recognize how this impacts families as a whole, families and communities. And an inadequate response to a mental health crisis can definitely result in a traumatic experience for everyone involved, families, communities, and in particular children. Thank you very much, Natasha. We do very much appreciate that. And also, thank you for bringing attention to the minority population. That is also a very important aspect and something that the Marcus Alert definitely will emphasize racial equity as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. I'm not sure. I don't think we have anyone else after Natasha. Christy, do we have anyone else?
Yes, Michael wants to speak again, and Lisa has queued him up. So I'm hoping that he's set his English.
Yes.
Yay, good job, Michael.
I'm here. Thank you for allowing me to speak again. I was checking my notes and I realized I'd forgotten something. So one of the something else I'd want to point out is kind of the culture shift that's necessarily not just with the law enforcement, but also with social service providers, with the CSBs or whomever is providing this kind of co-response. And what, in my mind, this is sometimes we talk about, or I hear that law enforcement officers are worried about, hey, I'm not trained to be a social worker. And yet, in so much of my job, I'm feeling like I'm a social worker. Of course, it's not quite that simple. Law enforcement do work with people, and that's people are messy and complicated, and everybody does uh, has to really work with that. But the other way around is, what we're really talking about is social workers becoming more like one of the arm of a public safety arm. We have police, fire, we have EMS, we have these public safety arms and organizations. And with that becomes a different level of risk that you're willing to accept. And generally, when people are trained to be clinicians, you're trained to accept a certain level of risk. This is, of course, all my opinion here. But going in and perhaps going in before a scene has been cleared, that's a different level of risk than people are trained to expect or that they should even want to do. And what do you do with that? It's like, hey, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't go to grad school for this. I would have, I would have a badge if I would have done that. There's we can really feel that way, and I really empathize with that. But also, it is kind of wearing this other hat. So you are, if you want to say, a therapist, public safety worker. So you are going in that different hat. So there is a higher level of risk. It's going to have to be, you're going to have to accept some level of risk, unfortunately, or fortunately, in order to be able to effectively address more crises. And that's not to say I expect that there's going to be a huge uptick in assaults and or other tragedies, because the studies have really shown here and across the country that the vast majority of these calls can be really resolved well with having some sort of co-response model. But it does entail a level of risk and discomfort that's different. And there are a number of laws and regulations in Virginia that really make it difficult for police to say, no, we can let you in here, or we can let the situation be controlled in a different way. And I am not an expert on all those laws and regulations, so you'd have to talk to somebody else. But I do hear about many of them. And you bump into that about how you dispatch people, when you do that, what type of calls they're supposed to be, when you go, and who needs to go in, how do you talk to people, and when in this situation where you have a knife, what does that trigger? There and really those, so it's not, I think some of the other laws need to be addressed as well. And with the kind of wearing a public safety hat as you're walking in there, I think that comes with risk, also comes with privileges and responsibilities too. And I think that's part of what the culture change around is, saying somebody else is putting on this other almost new hat it's a new hat. You're not entirely a clinical social service provider. You're not entirely a public safety only focus, but it's this almost like new profession or new umbrella to think about. And how do you train people and equip them to be able to operate in that and have everybody else understand what that is? But if you do, I think then people can expect that, hey, when I call my house is on fire, I get the fire department. When I call when somebody is beating me up, I get the police. When I call because I've had a heart attack, I get or my friend had a heart attack, I get an ambulance. And when I call because I'm having a mental health crisis, I get these other people. And of course, as we know, for any public safety, they can back each other up and sometimes go together for a number of reasons. Um, but I would hope that I would hope there would be a consideration of how do you frame this and what do you even call that? What is that? I think there's so many models and names across the country, but really, um, are we willing to have these providers kind of wearing some of the same hats and exercising some of the same privileges and level of risk? And thank you for letting me share again.
Thank you so much, Michael. We really appreciate that. Thank you for emphasizing the need for additional training and how that affects everyone, and having someone who is skilled with both education and actual experiences out in the field. I would like to share a comment from Monica. And earlier she emphasized the importance of social workers. And in this comment, she says, in some states, social workers do have badges. We go into homes alone all the time without backup or information about who or what is going on inside. And I think that's really important as well. Social workers do often go in homes alone, and oftentimes there's no information about what may be inside of the home, what the circumstances may be. And it's just an important aspect to think of, that all of these situations are so different. Sometimes they can be so different, and social workers do indeed play an important and critical role. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Monica, for that comment. Would anyone else like to speak? I don't think we have anyone else up next. Christy, are there any comments that we haven't read yet?
I do not believe so.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much to everyone for coming and sharing. And thank you, Catherine, for facilitating, and all of our work group members for supporting also. Yeah, so you can also, like we said, there will be a survey going out. We wanted to do these sessions first to make sure that we kind of get the right topics in the survey. And just Sunday and then tonight also, there have been topics. It's always good to get more nuance, and then there's also sort of new topics that come up. So definitely really appreciate it. When the survey is ready, we will advertise it in all of the ways that we've advertised this. So hopefully it will reach the same folks to complete that. And you can also always provide written comments at Marcus Alert at dbhds.virginia.gov. Our goal is to gather this input during the month of March and then begin writing in April. So there might be then some, weeks where we're working as a work group. All the work group meetings are open meetings though. And then towards the end, we hope to, be able to bring a product to the community around the end of May, beginning of June, and, share the progress that's been made for that final report, and maybe have a couple forums at that point, and then have that report to turn into the General Assembly in July. So please reach out if you have other thoughts. We really, really appreciate you coming tonight and sharing. Any other work group members want to share anything? All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a good night.